Hi, thank you all for being here. I'm Kay from Lifespace, a small charity based in Stratford-upon-Avon, not Stratford in London. Got to get that clear. Which Rachel, our CEO, will go more into telling more detail about it soon. We decided to do a panel on how to be an ally when it came to Black History Month. We wanted to highlight the fact that an awareness month shouldn't just be for a month, and it should be an all year round conversation. And that's why it's important to keep learning throughout the year. And we want to kind of highlight where there is a gap as well of places where there can be more education and where there can be more conversation. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who will explain more about Lifespace Trust, and then we will introduce our panel to everyone and go from there.
Very much, Kay. Lifespace is a charity that supports the wellbeing of young people aged 7 to 19 across South Warwickshire. We do that with mentoring programs, workshop and leadership opportunities. And it's the last one that I really want to mention, because we don't want to be seeing more young people who are struggling with their wellbeing and mental health. We want to change the systems and structures around them that have an impact. And that's why this sort of conversation is so important to us, because we do want to change the world, or we want to enable young people to change the world anyway. So we currently work with about 565 young people a year. Our plan is over the next few years to support over 1,000 in all sorts of ways, and to help them realise how amazing they are. So I'm delighted to be joined by a fabulous panel that Kay has organised. So thank you all very much. And I would like to start by introducing Sula Graham to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Kay. So my name's Sula Graham, and my background is in education. I worked in education for about 12 years in London and South Korea. But my current role right now, I run an organisation called Holla that goes into schools to deliver workshops around positive Black education. And we have inspirers and role models that go into uplift students. And the other part of the time, I have my own consultancy firm that does work around diversity and inclusion, personal self-development, anti-racism, and mental health and wellbeing. And I've come together with Rachel and with Kay to, talk about a very important issue, which is allyship, what allyship looks like, why it's so important. And the reason we've decided to do this is because we want to talk about the next steps after last year. A lot came out, there's a lot of learning, a lot of people are changing, but what's next? It can't just be a tick box or something we did last year or something we do in a month. We need to keep unlearning actually, and then learning again. And that's why we feel like this is really important, to give more people more advice and around how to be an ally.
Thank you, Sula. And thank you so much for your help in the prep with this panel today. I'm going to start with my screen. So we're going to go with Nen. Nen, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thanks, Kay, and thanks for inviting me along to take part. So my name's Nairn MacDonald. I'm 26 years old and I'm from the west coast of Scotland, and I've spent the last kind of 10 years in community and youth advocacy, working with young people and on behalf of young people to raise their voices and to help them get their voices heard at local and national levels. And I now sit on a number of charity boards and local groups which are working to make our communities better. And when Kay reached out to invite me to join this panel, I felt almost honoured to be asked to be a part of it, because I think there's such a responsibility on people like me, who is, I am a cis white man. So automatically, just being cis, I have privilege. Being white, I have privilege. Being a man, I have privilege. And there's an inherent responsibility on people like me to use our privilege, not just to amplify voices, but to help empower others, to give some of that privilege away, almost, to make sure that, there's seats at the table for everybody else, even if that means vacating a seat ourselves. So I was really, really honoured to be invited along, and I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. So thanks again, Kay.
Thank you so much, Nan, and thank you so much for being part of our panel. Tatiana, would you like to go next, please?
My name is Tatiana Enin. I'm 22 years old and I'm from London. I'm a community organizer. I specifically have experience in organising around migrant issues and increasing the access of undocumented migrants to citizenship. And currently, I support young activists across Europe and the UK in their change-making work and just helping them to change the communities where they are. And I'm really, really grateful to be a part of this panel today.
Thank you so much again for your time. Antonio, your turn.
Caught me there in the middle of sipping my juice. Sorry. Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Antonio. I'm a 23-year-old mental health activist, public speaker, and disruptor. I'm also a student at the University of Essex studying psychology with cognitive neuroscience. And a lot of my work in university and outside of university actually is around advocating for young Black men's mental health and shining a light on the fact that people from individuals from underrepresented communities do struggle, whether we speak of it or whether we're represented in that sector or not. We do struggle, and we lack hope in struggling because there is so little people talking about it that we don't see who is actually struggling within our own community. And so a lot of the work I do in studying psychology and in advocating for young Black men's mental health is to, I guess, break down that barrier of, I am struggling, but look, I'm struggling like you and getting through it. And so we should be able to speak about it just as everyone else does. And that's, that makes up the basis of why I accepted to join this panel, because I'm very for moving beyond tokenism within the charity space as volunteers from underrepresented communities. And I think the first step to it is bringing that awareness, which is as a panel we will do in conversing about it, but also following on with action, because as I always say to everyone, if you're aware it's raining tomorrow and you don't wear a jacket tomorrow, that awareness meant nothing. And so from awareness we move into action. That's the best course or method for changing the world, I guess.
I want to take a bunch of quotes that you've all said so far and make them into t-shirts or postcards and put them onto everything. Everything that has been said has just been incredible. I'm going to do the cliche line that says, last but not least, Corey, would you like to introduce yourself?
I was going to say the line, you stole the line from me. You know what I mean? Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am Corey. I'm 24 years old. I work for a youth insight and engagement agency called Beat Freaks. If you can't tell from the awful accent, I'm from Birmingham. I'm really, really excited to take part in this and see kind of what comes up in the discussions and everyone's opinions and experiences. It's going to be really, really cool. One of the main reasons I'm really excited is just because I feel like maybe over the past year or so, I've kind of had like a renewed perspective on things. And Antonio was saying about kind of taking action. I feel like I've kind of been on the sidelines a little bit and I might have been aware, but maybe, willfully ignorant, and now I kind of want to get stuck in and actually try and make a difference. So it's why one of the reasons I'm here today. And I'm going to throw it back over to Kay.
Lost count of the number of times I said thank you, so I'm going to do it one last time. Thank you all again. So we've kind of touched on it about why it's important to all of you to be part of this discussion, but I'm going to go around again and ask you specifically however many reasons specifically why it is important to you as an individual, or however you want to perceive that question. Tula, would you like to begin?
Why it is important for me to be part of a discussion around allyship is because it's the next step. I think there has been a lot of learning or unlearning. I call it unlearning because people are having to unlearn stuff that they've been taught for years and years and years. Why it's important is because the Black community cannot do this by themselves. There is an idea that it is the Black community's responsibility to educate the rest of the world on the oppression that's been put on them from the white community and systems, governments, etc. We can't change it. We didn't create the racism. We're not necessarily the ones causing it. It's not that all white people are racist, but it is for white people to champion this within their communities, have conversations within their families about why they have the views or why things have been happening, and become allies to then help. We need help. We can't do it by ourselves. And I think we had mass change last year it was incredible to see. For me, a little bit too late, but change has to happen. And but I think people have stopped a little bit. Life gets back to normal, you know, we go back to our daily, what we have to do. And I think that there's more than that. Then, okay, I'm awake now, I've watched some documentaries, or, you know, I was saddened by these deaths. Action now needs to be taken. So this is why it's important for me, because we, you know, what I am realizing is not everyone knows what to do next. So I may know, of course, because it's my lived experience. I've been through it. It's everything that I do every day, but not everyone knows. So we have to be able to help people at the same time. So this is part of that step of showing people what they can physically do to make a difference as an ally.
I'm going to throw it over to Nan, if that's okay. In contradiction to that, so obviously Sula talks about how it's a lived experience. How do you perceive that coming from where you're from?
Yeah, and I think there's some follow on from what Sula was saying, because I think there is a responsibility on all white people, regardless of status or wealth or social background, to take some sort of responsibility for the actions of our predecessors. From as much as I know, my family weren't involved in the kind of stuff, the imperial kind of empire of that came out of Glasgow, because Scotland was certainly involved. And there's a need to take that responsibility. And also I think there's a need for white people as a collective to take an understanding that it was us. Like, I always find it incredibly annoying when we see kind of coverage of things like, you know, a terror attack in this place or a terror attack in this place, and if they're for example, if they're Muslim, there's a need for all Muslims in the whole country to take responsibility for that. But a crazy white person shoots up a school in the US, and it's not required of all white people to call it that or to take responsibility for that person. So I think there's a dichotomy there, and there's inherent inequality there. And I think it's important for white people to take a stand and to use the platforms that we may have to amplify that and to speak out and to encourage other white people to become allies and to kind of join the movement.
So Tatiana, with your line of work, from what Nan said, what side have you seen of that with your stand up, was that correct? Organization that you were part of?
Unfortunately, I had somebody at the door. That's why I put the camera off, so I missed what he just said.
So in terms of seeing racism in the sense of in your organization from a migrant background, how has that been in real life or in society, in your experience?
Well, really and truly, I think even if we bring it back to today, you know, there's a nationality and borders bill that is going to be debated in Parliament, and clause 9 of that bill would give the state the power to revoke the citizenship of a British citizen without them knowing. That in itself is what racism looks like manifested through a system. And this is the exact same thing that we were fighting through SUSO 6 years ago. It was the fact that the state had the power to arbitrarily deny people of what was actually theirs. The fact that the state had the power to literally make somebody an alien in their own home just because of where they came from before arriving in this country. And, you know, the message that sends is, if you are a non-white British person, no matter how much you try to assimilate, no matter how long you live in this country, you will never be seen as British enough, which in itself is racist. So I think, you know, racism is something that pervades, you know, how migration is, you know, treated across the globe, across the world. There's a huge work that needs to be undertaken when it comes to rewriting our immigration systems, our immigration laws. So that's what it looks like. It looks like just seeing, and I think the funny thing is that these immigration problems don't just manifest themselves in non-white spaces as well, we see how also white people are also disenfranchised because of the laws that we have as well. So I think it's really funny how racism can almost evolve and kind of impact the people that had a part in playing, like had a part in building that and creating that. So I think that's really interesting as well. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
So why, after all your experience, why is it important to you to be part of this discussion today?
It's important for me to be a part of this discussion today because in the conversations that I've had with people of color, I sense a lot of fear, and the fear is saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing. And that's why spaces like these are important, because it relieves people of the pressure to say the right thing and, you know, to do the right thing as well. I see community change, social justice as a learning space, a space where we need to be compassionate with one another and have grace for the fact that we are all learning this together. So I think it's important to create that safe space for, you know, people that aren't directly affected by racism to ask the questions that they need to ask and really just sincerely learn from those that are really affected by this. So yeah.
I think a key term that you said there was safe space, and that is something that we say a lot, and we don't just say it for the sake of saying it as well. Corey, I'm going to flip it to you if that's okay. Why is it important to you, and what has been your experience to get to now?
I guess it's important to me personally and professionally. Within my line of work, I deal with like primarily young people, but obviously a lot of it is with like, yeah, it's kind of just in regards to really trying to understand where people are coming from when they come to take part in whatever work that any projects that we've got on. Personally, like, so my partner's Caribbean, so my daughter is obviously she's of mixed heritage. So I think like I really just want to explore, like give my opinion and explore how to be an ally, because I really want to, you know, in 10, 15 years time, my daughter's going to have to experience a lot of the things that young British people experience nowadays. So I want to make sure that at least I can educate her and be aware of what's going on, so that, you know, we can kind of steer the conversation in the right way when she gets older. But even more so for me, just to try and make sure that I can have a positive impact. So I can kind of challenge behaviours where I see them, and not just kind of sit by and, you know, just be like, oh, you know, kind of play it off a little bit. So I feel like the reason I got here is because I'm starting to get involved, but I really want to explore that a little bit more. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
That kind of links to Antonio's analogy earlier about the rain. You know, something's going to happen. The raincoat analogy, I guess. In one sense, is that how? Am I right to say that?
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah, 100%.
Antonio, why is it important for you to be? Why is it important for you to be here and part of this discussion? You are very. You've been part of a lot of panels as well, so you've got a lot of experience talking about this.
Yeah, I'm 23, but I think the experience I've had on panels has made me at least 30 now. And I think it's important. I think if there was a better word for important, a more dire word for important, that's what I would use right now. Unfortunately, I don't study English, so my vocabulary isn't that extensive. However, it's, for the lack of vocabulary, important, because education is power. And the greatest man in the world once said, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. And if no one knows who said that, that was Spider-Man. And the reason I say that is because anyone can give knowledge, anyone can share knowledge. However, toxic knowledge can also be shared. And that's where a lot of conversations are going wrong, because the knowledge they're sharing within those conversations are either accurate, you know, or misconceived, or simply toxic. They're not the knowledge that should be shared. And conversations like this that we're having here now are the conversations that are necessary, you know, to change, revert those misconceptions that have been created from toxic knowledge that's been shared. And I think a lot of what goes on and what we do, you know, whatever community it comes from, our reactions play a part in that provocation, right? And I think, you know, when a lot of people ask me about how I've experienced racism, I mean, of course, I've experienced racism, but racism isn't the only thing I've experienced. And I've always learned from my journey through mental ill health that there is always two sides to a story. And a lot of the times, a story is misconveyed because assumptions are made, because not enough has been shared in that story. So assumptions are made to fill up those gaps, and those assumptions make the end result very dangerous. And so, I sometimes think to myself, as I said, when people ask me about racism, and they're like, well, how did you like manage? How did you cope with that? How did you handle it? And that's why I say our reactions can play a part in that provocation, because instead of me reacting back with, I guess, rage, frustration, which we've all got within us from, what's been going on personally, indirectly and directly. However, to challenge that and manage in a way that's educating, as I said, reverting that misportrayed education that probably has filled the minds of those with assumptions, because they haven't got enough knowledge or idea of what it is actually. And so I try to always counter that, use my reaction to counter that by educating, or by creating allyship, as you mentioned. I think that's how we go about it. It's not always about pointing a finger and saying you've done this wrong and you've done this wrong and this is happening here and this is happening. Well, actually, what can I do to play up to improve that? I'm gonna have enough. I've had enough of people pointing a finger at and saying you're doing this, you're doing that, and this is wrong, this is wrong. Actually, you know what? I came on today. I would say to you, you started this panel a bit early. Well, actually, no. Why didn't I didn't prepare myself a bit earlier? I think it's changing how we see it. Looking at what I can do, or what I can import, what I can add to that, rather than, we're all aware that things are going wrong. We're all aware of that. I think, if every person on this planet that breathes, we're all aware. But what did I say about awareness? It's not enough if you put a full stop next to it. And so we take that action, and that's why it's important for me to be here in this conversation.
I think a lot of what you said as well as I think a lot of people are probably thinking is like accountability as well. That's a big thing. It's okay to make a mistake, but hold yourself accountable and learn from your mistakes as well, which I think is something that I was taught very young age as well. If I made a mistake, I'd be called out and then you wouldn't do it again. And I love the Spider-Man analogy. Let's hope we can channel that to our audience today. Rachel, why is it important for you to be part of this discussion as a person, head of an organization, but also personally and professionally?
I think it's important because I haven't experienced racism. I've experienced sexism and I've experienced ageism increasingly, but I haven't experienced racism. But I think that the impact is devastating. There's an article in today's Evening Standard by Sir Steve McQueen, and it's entitled "Black Men Deserve to Grow Old," and it's about the health inequalities that come with racism. And I think, it's the action that we need to take. There's awareness, but actually it's that next step. If we want systemic change, it has to be rooted in action. And I think that allies are the only way of doing it. Just in terms of numbers, people who are Black or from Asian or other ethnic minorities are less than 15% of the population in this country. So they won't always be in the room. So allies are the only way of making sure that health inequalities are addressed. All the other inequalities that we see are being addressed. And I agree, I agree with everyone that's spoken. It is our collective responsibility to make that happen, because we want to be part of that world. And I don't know how it feels, but I know what I want the world to look like. And it's not a place in which the colour of your skin determines your outcomes or your health opportunities or any of those other things. So, but it feels really uncomfortable talking about race. So I just uncomfortable. But I want to get better at it, because not talking about it is literally costing the lives of people in this country. So
it's really interesting to say about being uncomfortable as well. Like, recently in the news, there's been talk about removing the term BAME, and that is obviously because it's got derogatory connotations, which is, I want to say, a step in the right direction, but it's not exactly a step. It's small little, few centimeters in the right direction, I guess.
Also, I think, Rennie describes it as a nice white person. Nice white people can still make huge mistakes. So, I'm just going to.
Yeah. And that's important. Again, mistakes as well. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to have these discussions, but also pick yourself up from them as well. And I think we need to highlight that. So I'm going to go to my next question. So what is an ally and why is allyship important? Nen, would you like to take this question first?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, being an ally is about, one most important thing I think about being an ally is listening and understanding, listening to the lived experiences of people of color, listening actively, not just listening and paying kind of like active listening, actually listening and trying to understand it. But then also being willing to take accountability, and what we spoke about, that responsibility. I look at things like there's a man who was Scotland's first Black professor who's called Sir Jeff Palmer, and he has been calling for as long as I can remember for Scotland to start teaching about Scotland's role in the empire and more in slavery and all the things that went on under the empire, for it to be taught in our curriculum, and it's still not happened. There's people that make claims that and promises, and it hasn't happened yet. And that leads to the situation we have in Scotland, where there's a debate around racism or the Scotland's role in slavery. It's very much focused on, people will say, the English Empire, because we've othered it, and that's, I think, a big problem. And I suppose it goes back to what Suella was talking about earlier about that white fragility. We like to other things, well, it wasn't us, it was the English Empire, or it wasn't us, it was, merchants or whoever it may be. And I think being an ally is taking some accountability and taking some responsibility. And also just being willing to share a platform, but then also being willing to give up a spot in your platform. And I also think there's a number of politicians that I greatly admire who have recently stood back from, they've been invited to take part in a workshop or a panel and found out there's no women on it. And they've said, nope, I'm not coming because this space should be filled by a woman. Well, they should be doing that for people of colour as well. If I was to turn up to a panel to discuss racism and it's all old white men or white women, whoever it may be, there's clearly something inherently wrong, and being an ally means stepping back and going, well, do you know something? I don't want to be a part of this, because it's clear that you're not taking it seriously if you're not going to have those lived experiences. It's hard, it's difficult, it's emotional. There is an inherent emotive side to being an ally, which means listening and hearing the stories of people that we know in our communities, and understanding that there is that dichotomy, that I walk down the street and see a police officer and I will say hello and talk to them. I don't have that the fear and the distrust of the police that a person of colour in my community will have, because I have that inherent privilege. So it's about understanding that and listening and being willing to take a step back when needed and say, I shouldn't be expressing this. This is for somebody else, and sharing a platform, but also giving up your seat at the table, frankly, when there's nobody else there to share the story.
Tatiana, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, just going off of what Naomi said, in response to him talking about the importance of listening. For me, a good ally or allyship looks like selfless service. And what I mean by that is, after you're done listening to what that community is saying and what they want, it's being willing to lay aside your own agenda as a white person that struggles with discomfort, as a white person that is afraid to confront their own privilege, leaving aside your own agenda and asking that community, how can I serve you? What does support look like for you? And I think maybe the issue that Black people have with non-Black allies is that it seems as though an agenda is being imposed on us. We're being told how to heal. We're being told how to solve our community's problems. And we're not looking for your input. We're looking for an ally. And the difference is that an ally is a supporter. An ally is there to push the cause. An ally is there to literally just push the truck, right? But you don't go ahead of everyone and start steering the truck. That's not your role. So for me, a good ally looks like somebody that's okay, I've listened to you. And not only have I listened to you, but I've humbled myself enough to be like, I don't have the answers here, and I don't have the right to tell you guys how to go about things. How would you like me to help? And it looks like supporting that community and doing it, and knowing when to pass the mic, knowing when to take the step back when necessary. And I think allyship is important because, as Sula said earlier, we can't do this alone. It's impossible. I mean, as a Christian, I believe humans were created to be in relationship with one another. And I don't believe in like separatism. I believe we're all here to be one. We can't undo 400 years of systemic oppression and marginalization alone. It's not going to happen. We actively need those that played a part in erecting these systems and those that benefit from those systems to help us in breaking them down. So that's why I think allyship is super important.
Wow, thank you. I can see Rachel taking notes as well. I really hope that people are thinking, like the cogs are turning in people's brains right now, like people that are watching. Corey, what would you like to add anything to that?
There's so much going on in my brain. Like Nan said something that had like a story from when I was a teenager, and then when Tatiana was talking, it kind of reminded me about a more recent conversation I had with some work colleagues. It was based around we were talking about racism towards white people and people of color and how it's different. And I was speaking with some of my colleagues who are people of color, and even though I didn't fully understand, I think being a good ally is really like Ned and Tatiana were saying, it's about listening. So even though I didn't share their point of view at the beginning of the conversation, I was like, okay, you think this, I think this. Why do you think this? How did you get to that conclusion? Talk to me, and we'll have that conversation. We'll open up that dialogue, because I like to think that you can be open-minded about anything. So it's me trying to unlearn what I already know, and kind of take on those new experiences. And the other thing that I was thinking about, I think good allyship is about doing what's right, even if it's for someone that you don't know. So that conversation I have with people, and those people are my friends, my work colleagues. Now, the story that Nan kind of reminded me of is, I was on a train with a few of my friends, like a mixed ethnicities in our friend group. There's only about 4 or 5 of us. Now, it's a bit of a long one. Keep with me though, because there's a point to it. So essentially, we're on this train, and a bunch of young black kids like messing around, holding the doors open, doing what teenagers do. They jump off, and the train carries on going into the next train station. Now, the lady that was driving the train then mistook another black gentleman for one of these kids, and she was like, "Oh, I've seen you do this." She's called the police, blah 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 blah, red all this. And my man's there like, I didn't do it. This wasn't me. I'm just here with my daughter, just trying to get from one place to another. So we had to advocate there, say, no, listen, like we saw what happened. The police still kept, even though we're there, yeah, okay, they might disregard our opinion as teenagers. Like Rachel was saying, ageism to a certain extent. We were trying to say, no, like we were witnesses, we saw what happened. This guy still got arrested by like 2 different police officers, even though we were there saying, no, this didn't happen. It took, we stood there and we were like calmly trying to have the conversation as much as we could. And it's just kind of really putting yourself in those situations where, Antonia said that you don't want to be like, was it like provocation, like the reaction you have. So if we stood there and we were trying to have the conversation aggressively or trying to be a certain type of way, it wouldn't have helped the situation. So it's like positively challenging, saying no, like challenging the status quo, making sure that you try to be reasonable with people and try and get your point across in the right way. So I think good allies listen, help anyone that they see, and yeah, just try and change their viewpoints.
I want to highlight something that you said at the beginning of when you start speaking about how it's important to actually want to have them conversations, no matter how uncomfortable they are. It's important to take that first step, which I think some people are very scared of as well, or don't know how to perceive that. So I want to highlight the fact that it's okay to have the conversations and be uncomfortable, but also go in with an open mind and be willing to have your, your opinions or your thoughts challenged, and that's okay. Sula, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, actually, just moving on from what you've said, I think what I've come up against and I struggle with is still having to have conversations with white people about their opinions on what they think I should be thinking and feeling, because they don't want to put ego aside or unlearn. So I shouldn't at this point still be having to explain to you that racism exists, that it is a problem, and that, you know, we are fighting for this. And it is for a lot of people, it's hard. I understand that it is hard when you have had privilege or been taught certain things for a long time. I think a lot of people, firstly, are fearful that, well, you know, if we start giving all of this to other communities, what about us? And, you know, there's equality for all, there's enough for everyone. But also I think people then, there's fear because everyone inherently has prejudice, right? And there's a lot of fear of, well, you know, God, I did say that thing before, or I have behaved like this, or I haven't stood up. So then comes the defense. And it's okay if you've been prejudiced in the past, we all have our own prejudices, but people need to put the barriers down, the ego down, and just listen and learn. And if a person of color is telling you something, whether you agree with it or not, it's not your place to be telling them you don't agree with it at this point in time, because we know we've known racism existed for a very long time. But at this point, it is about ego aside, listening and learning. And what I found with some people is they are so worried about being called racist that it kind of stifles them, or they care more about being called racist than they do about actually changing their own prejudice and racism. So what we need to start with, bottom line, is accepting we all have prejudice. And especially of the, you know, the white community need to accept that. And that's okay. No one's going to string you up. No one's going to do anything, except you have that, and then starts to work through that. So it does start within, it does start with us. Antonio talked about, you know, it's the I, right? What do I need to do? I think the first thing someone needs to do before they even take up allyship is have a look at their own prejudice, have a look at what makes them feel uncomfortable, and try and do the unlearning, because actually sometimes more damage can be done when you're like, right, I'm going to help you, I'm going to do all of these things, I'm coming in to help, and you can make a massive mess of it. I had someone the other day tell me, the term you're supposed to be using, Sula, is microaggressions, and I went, thank you very much for that. Do you think when I'm speaking to my other friends of colour about the racism that I face, that we say to each other, I had a microaggression today? So although we should have these correct terms, it is not necessarily for people to be telling us how to feel. It is about the listening and the learning.
I want to highlight again, like the unlearning aspect. I think a lot of people are afraid to unlearn as well. It's okay to say, you know, you have this to work on, this to work on. Something that I think we all do. I hope I'm not putting words in people's mouth. It's something I know that I do as well. Corey, did you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, man. I guess it's just covering something that I just popped in the chat, really, just about kind of biases, and that it's perfectly okay. Not every bias is a negative bias. I think it's based off, I think the term is heuristics, where we just allocate certain things and certain people into certain boxes and compartmentalize that, because that's just how our brains process information. It helps us do things a little bit quicker. But it's just being aware, okay, I know where my biases are. Like, I know, okay, I have biases towards like middle-aged black ladies because they remind me of like my mother-in-law, for argument's sake. That's fine, but I just need to be aware of that. So it in the same way, like it's going to be the same for everyone else, whatever their lived experiences, whatever people they've been across. It's just try and have as many conscious biases as possible, so that you don't have anything that's talking to you unconsciously, if that makes sense.
Rachel, do you have any thoughts about this discussion right now?
I just wanted to say, to take on your points, that I think that's the ownership of the fact that I feel uncomfortable talking about racism is my issue. It's not anyone else's. And I think that change, that recognition, is critical to Tatiana's beautiful description of selfless service, of that description of you know, being in the space with the right mindset, and getting out of the way often, and being quiet and allowing other conversations. So yeah, I think I read it's a bit like when someone becomes a new parent and they're like the first time that, you know, they think it's like almost the first time anyone's had a baby. They talk about it with that sort of evangelical enthusiasm, and I often see people talking about issues that underrepresented communities have been talking about for years and centuries, and suddenly it's like this new, you know, and that must be incredibly frustrating. So no, I think there's just a lot of education to do, but you know, on the way to something, not you know, we still need to grab our jackets at some point, Antonio.
Something that I've been aware of I've become more aware of in the last couple of years is how racism has impacted my life, and how it's been something that I've grown up with but never actually addressed or never saw for what it was, because it became my norm. And that's been a lot of unlearning on my part in the last few years. And that has been through meeting different people from various backgrounds, or being part of different projects, etc. So I know you're all like from different parts of the walks of life as well. So how has racism impacted your life, or what have you seen that has kind of made you stop and think, wow, this is something I'm going to take away?
I'm happy to go with that. I mean, we'll be here forever, so I'll try and be short, but I've had massive impact in the way that racism has affected my life. I've always classed myself as an activist and an anti-racist. I am of dual heritage or mixed race. My mum was white, my father was Jamaican. I was very blessed and lucky that I had a white mother that has been a trailblazer and an activist for years. And she knew that she was having children of colour, so she decided to teach herself Black education and Black history. And my white mum taught me Black history. That's not the norm in many mixed race couples or in many places. So I was lucky to have that. My mum told me society is not going to see you as beautiful, but you are, and prepared me for, sadly, what the world was going to throw at me. So I was prepared to a certain extent. I had racism in terms of my white side of my family was extremely racist. And when I was young, I kind of put that in the box of, well, that's just like older people are like that. Because then I'd come back, because they lived in Cambridge, and I'd come back to Hackney that was diverse and open-minded, and so I kind of put it in that box. And actually I was a little bit naive. I thought old people are racist, and where I live in East London, everyone's not like that. Then I got to university in Bristol and faced racism, awful racism, from actually my my lecturers. So on the so-called best universities in the country, I had terrible racism from them. I got told I was only there as a token Black person because they have to let a few Black people in. I was called coloured and half caste. And I was studying sociology and social policy, which is 10 times worse. That really impacted me. That was like a slap in the face. That was a wake-up call, because that was, wow, the rest of the UK is not London and Hackney. Like, it was really tough to bear, because it made me go inside myself. I was brought up to be proud to be Black and mixed race, and I was bouncing around really proud of it all. And then I just went into my shell. And then came back to London and kind of brushed it off again, like that was there, that happened, didn't really deal with it. And I realized, actually, like many Black people, was just, you just keep putting it down, but it's going to come out in some way. I had an awakening before Black Lives Matter last year in terms of what I will and won't stand for anymore. And I know a lot of my Black friends felt like they could breathe for the first time after last year, because they could finally challenge and say what had happened to them, and people weren't allowed to gaslight them. But I was in South Korea for 2 years and had the worst racism of my life. My hair pulled, my skin touched, I was attacked twice, I was told to leave the country. And I would equate it to racism that I think a lot of my Black male friends and family have been facing in this country for a long time, that I haven't, as a lighter skinned or a woman of color that's mixed. Because I know that a lot of my Black male friends and family have been beaten up by the police, NFs, all of those things here. And I faced that in South Korea, and it was the most awful experience of my life. What it did was put fire in my belly, that I was like, I will not be standing for this ever again. And I'm going to do everything in my power to not allow this to happen anymore. But it gave me my voice again. So although racism has impacted me in a terrible way, and I have a lot of trauma from it, it has pushed me to make sure that something is different for the next generation, or for when I have kids, or, it has allowed me to speak my truth now unapologetically. But it has had awful impact, and I don't think people realize, with their words, with their comments, the trauma that every day we have to deal with. You feel suffocated, you feel unseen, you feel feared, you feel scared. And I'm a confident person, but it's had massive impact up until today, and I still think I'm dealing with that trauma.
Thank you so much for being so open and honest there. I think has that kind of changed as you've gotten older, navigating them feelings a bit more, or is that something still, do you believe, this might be a heavy question, but still deeply rooted?
I think I tell you what's healing for me. That's the best way I look at trauma, and not what has been healing for me is the work that I do. And being heard, actually being heard for the first time, because I used to like post stuff on social media and talk, 4 years before George Floyd, there was about 4 or 5 Black men murdered in America, recorded, and no one gave a damn about it. And I was posting all over social media, and I had people saying, oh, come on, Sulu, you're posting a bit too much today, and all of these comments, and I didn't feel heard. So I still spoke up, but it is awful being shut down constantly. So I am at a stage now where at least I can say it, and whether they agree with me or not, people have to be accountable or listen. So I am healing my trauma because of the work that I do, doing things like this, bringing awareness, and just being able to breathe and speak about it. I think it will always impact me, but that's the way that I'm healing it. It's the best way I can describe that.
Thank you for being so open and honest.
Sula, big up to you, man, because that's genuinely, that's
Corey,
moved
would
me.
you like to add
It's really
anything?
emotive, and I feel like that's, you're sharing something that's really close to you, and I feel like that's quite a vulnerable thing to do. Obviously, it's a safe space, but genuinely, thank you. Like, I know it probably took a lot to do that, so yeah, man. Let me just gather myself for a quick second. I guess so. I've almost had like a bit of an opposite experience to you, Sula, because I am like of mixed or dual heritage, so I'm like Pakistani and white, but because I'm quite like light skinned, I can pass as like white passing, and I think that's how like a lot of people, I got a mustache, but most people just think, you're like Italian, or you like Greek, or a lot of people just assume that I'm from some sort of heritage that is predominantly white in Europe, kind of thing. So I guess I've been almost a little bit lucky in that sense, where I haven't experienced racism as much, like I have here and there, but it's more like I've been a bystander, and the racism has been directed towards someone else that I am with, whether it like one of my close friends, he's Jamaican and English, and he's like, he had a mad afro back in the day, and loads of people used to come up and want to touch it and stuff, especially if it wasn't from within their culture. And then I've been with my partner for about 4 years now, and that was my first real exposure to Black culture, like in depth, if that makes sense, kind of like seeing a family, seeing how they live, like all that kind of stuff. And I've had a few times in the past where, I think maybe 6 months ago, we were again on a train. We were on a train, and we were going on a train near Wolverhampton, and a bunch of these white guys got on, and they didn't mention race until she came out of the toilet, and then they all started saying very clearly, like, I'm definitely not racist. I used to be racist, but I'm not racist anymore, I swear. And they were really making a point of it, and it was just really super uncomfortable. And it's again just trying to have, they were trying to tell me, I'm from a village outside Wolves, and Black people have a hard time there, but I'm not racist, like that kind of stuff, really. And it's kind of just trying to have those conversations with people without trying to, that's my message, that's my daughter, trying to, like Antonio said, you don't want to react with rage, you want to try and like lead them to the conclusion that you're at without directly saying you're wrong, essentially. So yeah, I do feel quite lucky in the sense that I haven't had to experience too much racism, but I've seen how it's impacted my life already, and I know it's going to impact my life in the future. So it's just working on having these conversations, I guess.
I'm just sitting back and just taking in everything you guys say. Thank you so much for like being so open, and it's not easy. It's not an easy topic to talk about. So thank you so much for all your honesty and opening up. Yeah, definitely not an easy one. While you guys are talking, you've got, I don't know, cogs going off, different experiences, and I'm sure people can relate in some way if they've experienced this, and it can be hard to listen to sometimes as well. As we've kind of said, like there are loads of different impacts for racism, stuff that we probably don't even realize that has been embedded in us. So how can people how can you give an example of a good ally, or what is good allyship and bad allyship? If we can sum that up, what would you sum it up as?
I mean, for me, I suppose, as someone who is white and is trying to be an ally and trying to I think there is a very, very fine line between allyship and someone having, like white savior complex. There's a really, really fine line, and it's really, really sometimes hard to differentiate. And sometimes I'll find myself saying, right, okay, what is this? What part of this? Where on the line does it fall? But I suppose good allyship is exactly what Tatiana said earlier on. It's about, you know, being part of the movement, but not trying to lead it. It's about supporting, but not talking for. It's about using what connections you may have to advance the movement and to give opportunities and to get the message out there. And I suppose bad allyship is just the opposite. It's about, you know, it really, me as a white person trying to speak for people of color. It would be about me trying to, as a white person, trying to equate something that I've experienced, like Rachel said, you know, like I've experienced classism, but classism isn't the same as racism. I've experienced as a disabled person ableism, but that's not the same. It's just not the same. And you see that a lot on places like Twitter and stuff. It's like, oh, I've experienced discrimination. Well, yes, and fair enough, you have, but it's different. There isn't the institutional and the historical aspect to those sort of issues. And you know, I was sitting listening to all the conversation about how racism has affected your life, you know, and I was wondering if you were going to call on me, because the honest answer is, and personally, it hasn't, because I haven't experienced racism, and I'm a white man. And the first time I got kind of involved in anti-racism movement was around about 2015 with the death of Sheikh Bayou in Scotland, and that's when I started to think, well, actually, you know, my family aren't racist. There's definitely racism bigots within my family, but my immediate family aren't. My community that I knew were quite open. And you, is exactly what Suella said earlier on, you get inherently, you're like, well, where am I? I'm not like that. So how can that be Scotland, or how can that be Ayrshire? And then you start to understand, you start to listen to the stories, and you start to talk to people. Getting involved in Leaders Unlocked was the best eye-opening experience for me. I got to meet people like Amani and Romain who have experienced the criminal justice system and the racial aspect of that, and it was just eye-opening. So I think that's exactly what being a good ally is. It's about listening and supporting and not trying to drive. And bad allyship is the complete opposite, in trying to speak for people of color, because there's no point asking me or Rachel, like, how has racism impacted your life, because personally it hasn't. Like, we've experienced discrimination but not racism. So it's important to know that.
It's really interesting when we talk about racism and how you say that, and how we say it. Some people say that they haven't experienced it themselves as well. And I don't know if it's the same for Sula, Antonio, Corey, or Tatiana even, but I see, coming from a South Asian background as well, I describe it as racism within racism, or minorities within minority. A minority within a minority is some way that I would describe myself at some point. But the racism within racism, you have the whole aspect of casteism, and then you have the colorism that comes into it as well. And that's often forgotten about. So you just see all this history in one place, and then you don't take into consideration that within, I think I could use an example. In India, you look at someone, it's like from the Tudor times, I believe as well. You look at someone who has darker skin, they're seen as poorer because they're working out in the sun. So there's so much, I think, how do you describe it? There's so much layers to it that we can't even begin to unravel without understanding. We'd never understand the history, I guess, but I guess there's a lot more to it than we would fully ever begin to cover. Tatiana, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, for me, good allyship, it goes, well, no, good allyship for me doesn't exalt rational understanding above like personal understanding. And what I mean by that is, good allyship doesn't look like buying as many books as you can buy, watching as many documentaries as you can watch, and then failing to connect with the people that are actually affected by those things that you're studying. A good example is, I did my undergrad at SOAS, which is the School of Oriental and African Studies, and I studied politics and development studies. And I was one of the few Black people in my class. And, you know, in my degree, we deeply, deeply interrogated colonialism. We deeply, deeply interrogated, you know, unequal power dynamics between the global South, which is Africa, Asia, you know, the Middle East, Latin America, and, you know, the global North, which would be, you know, our Western developed countries. And I would, you know, be in these classes, and I would be with non-Black or non-people of color who knew so much about colonialism, racism, you know, all of these isms. But when it came to relating to me as a Black person who comes from a country, Ghana, which has been directly affected by colonialism, is a victim of these unequal economic, geopolitical dynamics, it's almost as if like I was caricaturized in that people treated me as a really fragile being. They were afraid of connecting with me out of the fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. Or I've studied so much about your people and your history, I don't know how to relate to you as a person. And that to me is bad allyship. They knew everything there was to know about colonialism, racism. They could name drop Kimberly Crenshaw, Walter Rodney, all of these amazing scholars and academics that we love to cite when we talk about racism. But when it came to actually relating to those people who have lived experience with the things that they studied, they didn't know what to do. And that is bad allyship. It looks like exalting what we know up here above how we connect here. So that to me is bad allyship. So I guess in contrast, good allyship balances the two. Good allyship doesn't make me feel othered because you're scared of offending me. Like that is the worst thing, because I understand you care, but it also makes me feel like I'm an alien, like I'm a foreign being because you don't know how to relate to me. I am a human. I'm not just the lived manifestation of the theory you've read in a book. Like I'm a human. Just treat me like a normal human. So I think it's like just really appealing to our humanity. Like good allyship appeals to humanity. It appeals to connection. So that's what I would say.
I think what I'm going to do is at the end of this, I'm going to write down good allyship versus bad allyship and just make a sheet of that as well as a resource, because I'm just so amazed at everything coming down. I can see Rachel writing notes, so I'm going to steal all of her notes at the end of this too. Yeah, it's really interesting. Just everything that's saying that you can relate to it all. Sula, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, just had a key thought that came up from that good allyship is in the same way that we fight for animals' rights, in the same way we fight for children's rights, in the same way we're trying to fight to save this earth, is the same way that we should be fighting for Black people's rights, because they are a group that we know have faced hundreds of years of oppression. We wouldn't question in any way, shape or form fighting for children to have safety and equal rights and be fed, would we? We just wouldn't even, we would never be having a discussion about the fact that we need to save and look after children, because there is that need, right? Sometimes I feel like people place more emphasis on, you know, protection of animals and saving animals, and it's not that we shouldn't, but when it comes to a discussion about Black people and helping them, we're actually, why are we even debating this? You know, like, why are we even having a discussion? But that's what we're doing. I don't mean in terms of this is incredible, but I mean, you know, people are still debating, do Black lives matter? Or is there racism? You know, all of these things. And we know there's facts to prove it, there's videos to prove it, there's hundreds of years to prove it. So to be a good ally is to just fight for what's right, to be a good human, right? In the same way that you fight for children's rights and animals' rights and for women's rights and LGBTQ, is the same that you should be fighting for Black rights. It doesn't have to affect you. You don't have to understand it. Just do the right thing for a group of people that need help and support, is basically what I came from that I thought.
Yeah, we definitely need to break this down into its own category. I think that would be just amazing to have to reflect back on. It's really interesting when you say that as well, because my family are African. My parents were born in Africa, and people don't see that history side of my heritage. And it's just about what you see, and no one wants to learn about how the oppression there was as well. It feels very hit and miss sometimes as well with that. I think it's all about starting that conversation, isn't it? About making people want to learn about history. Corey, would you like to add anything?
Yeah. So it was just what Zula was saying, and kind of making the comparison along, like, you know, animal rights and children's rights. Kind of, I've drawn like a parallel between. So essentially, I've been vegan at certain points in my life. I'm not vegan at this point in time, but I think when you try to have conversations, when vegans try to have conversations with people that eat animal products, and it forces people that eat animal products to acknowledge some sort of wrongdoing in their current ideology, they almost then turn around and vilify the vegans. Oh, they try and say that they're this, they're that. They refuse to, like, when your ego feels attacked, they get defensive and they don't want to, like, it takes a specific way of having that conversation to get someone to kind of come to that conclusion, at least. And I think between that and racism is very, very similar topics. It's very, like, it's a very delicate topic, isn't it? And you have to kind of navigate it in the right way to be able to try and get the best results from it. Yeah, I mean, that was just kind of something that popped into my head, and I just felt like sharing it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. Honestly, like, everything is all valuable. There is something to take away from every thought that comes into our heads when we are talking about this. And I'm gonna flip over to this next question. So, and I'm gonna ask Antonio this one because I want a Spider-Man analogy, hopefully, or a Marvel analogy if one comes. So, where does someone who is a non-person of color, or where does a white person start their journey of being an ally, or starting to learn, except like all of that?
First and foremost, I'm going to say that usually I do a lot of talking and a lot of people do a lot of listening. But the reason I've actually sat here quite quiet to many people's surprises is because I know what my own perspective is. And in offering my perspective, I'm only doing that to people outside of this panel, who don't know. But sitting on this panel and just listening to all of you, I want to email my sociology lecturer and tell her I'm ready for that race and racism class, because this has been very insightful. And yeah, it's just, as I said, I know what my perspective is, but it's always good to learn other people's perspective, and that's why I've just been sat back listening quite a bit. But to go back to your question, if you don't mind reminding me of the question, because I'm again very lost in all this conversation. That's just, yeah.
So where would a white person start, or a non-person of color, a person who is white, start with their allyship journey, or their experience of learning?
Yeah. Well, first, I think anyone that breathes, has a heart, has a brain, has lungs, is an ally. Even cat, dog, whatever it may be, is an ally. It's more people's free will to want to be an ally, and I think that's initially where someone who's not of color starts, is to want to be an ally. You ever been invited to like a dinner or whatever it may be, and that dinner has been nothing about you but about the person who's invited you? That's an example that it isn't someone choosing to be an ally. That's, I guess, tokenism in a way. Someone just invited you to have you there to make it look like they are an ally, but it's not. And so where we start is, I think it's to genuinely be an ally is to listen, to tell me of the weather tomorrow, and then remind me to bring my jacket. All those things, moving from listening to being aware to put in action, to putting it into action, is how someone of not of color starts. And to desperately think of a Marvel analogy, I think, in the world, in the space that we're in, all of us here, we are somewhat the race equality Avengers, right? And even it was good, wasn't it? Yeah, as I think, like, that's how our Captain America can be of someone not of color, as long as we're working together to that same goal, right? And I think, yeah, that's where I'll leave it at.
The only tick box I'm going to carry through life now is adding a Marvel analogy to everything now. So thank you for that inspiration. So does anyone else have anything they'd like to add on that? Otherwise, I'd like to start on our takeaways, because I think there's been so much discussion, and I think we could talk about this all night if we have the chance. But so go for it.
I'd just like to add, I don't remember who mentioned it earlier, about doing the work. I think it was Sula, internally first, like practically speaking, like that's the first part. Like, I mean, there are like really good like bias tests online. Maybe start by doing one of those, finding out what your subconscious and conscious biases are, implicit, explicit ones. And like really like sitting down, pen and paper, okay, like how do I feel when I see a young Black guy with a hoodie like walk beside me? How does that make me feel? Why do I feel that way? What informed that? Like what history, what experiences, what teachings inform that feeling? Just really doing the work, figuring out like what makes you feel uncomfortable, what questions you have, what you'd like to know more about. Doing the work first, and then like I guess transitioning to educating yourself, but not asking a Black person to show you the way. Like just Google like key things to search. Intersectionality, that's a great theory to begin with. That's the idea that our experiences of the world are not just informed by one part of our social makeup, but many. So me being Black, working class and female means that I will have a different experience to a Black female upper middle class woman. So that's the idea of intersectionality. So that's a good place to start, just like researching different things. And then I'm not sure about intentionally bringing up a conversation with your Black friends about like, what's your experience with racism? But if it ever pops up, or if you read something in the news related, like just bringing that up and just starting it naturally. But you don't want to do anything that seems forced or seems unnatural, because that would probably make that person that you're trying to engage with feel uncomfortable. But yeah, those are just my 2 cents.
It's really interesting you said that about bringing up a conversation. Something that I have learned with living with people that are from really small towns and cities and stuff is that, not cities, sorry, towns, is that it's really easy to get culture and race and religion and everything, all of that mixed up. So when I'm being asked I've been asked so many questions, but it's nice that people are willing to learn, but it's like, that's not the first lesson here. It's about differentiating and trying to understand how each compartmentalize as well. So yeah, that's my thought. I've got a hand up. Nen, go for it.
Yeah, no, the only thing I was going to add is, and I think it comes back to like how as a white person I can be an ally. And it's exactly like what Tatiana said, I think is exactly right when you talk about intersectionality. So I have white privilege, but I have less white privilege than say somebody like Boris Johnson. He has more white privilege than me because he's, upper class, rich, powerful. I'm working class and less powerful and certainly less wealthy. But and it's about that understanding that inherent bias and that inherent racism that's inbuilt. So it's about seeing headlines in a newspaper, and instead of just passing them by or just dismissing them, question them, trying to filter out, you know what, the likelihood is if it's from the Mail, the Express, certain outlets, there's going to be an inherent racist aspect to it, and being willing to call it out, because you see that still millions of people read these newspapers. So how that's, you take action. And I remember there was a quote a while ago that I read, and it was about acknowledging that although like when I saw the video, for example, of George Floyd, it hurt as a human being on a basic human level, it hurt, but that pain that I felt is nothing compared to the pain of the Black community was feeling. So although I feel pain, it's not about me, and it's about recognizing that. And I think that's about exactly what actually Tatiana was saying earlier on. Just don't join something because you want to lead it. Join it because you want to be a collective. And I do love the idea of the Avengers idea that, as long as everybody's working in unison, as long as somebody's not trying to lead where frankly they don't have a right to lead, there is that inherent progress. And also just be willing to question and be willing to stand up and call out. And it's like the small things, like we were saying, like when you're on a train, like call out the person that's using language that they shouldn't be used. And it's the same in Scotland. So we have that, what you were saying about culture and religion and background, that all gets melded. In the west coast of Scotland, we have the sectarian problem with Catholics and Protestants, and that gets combined with a class problem. So it's about, being willing to call it out. It's not a pleasant experience. It's scary to call it out because you don't know what's happening next, but it's about being willing to take that stand, because that experience that person's experiencing at that minute is probably the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th time they've experienced it that day, that week, that month. So it's just being willing to take that stand.
I think that leads on to There's so much to say. I wish we had all the time in the world, but I'm going to end on one question, and I'm going to go around each and every one of you in one sentence. Could you sum up, if the audience could take one thing in particular away from this discussion, what would it be?
I'll go first. Just to start now. I think some of this might be quite overwhelming. There's a lot to hear and a lot to take on, but just start small. Be it read a book. There's a book called The Good Ally, perfect way to start, by Nova Reid. She's incredible. Start with that. Do start by reading or watching something and then take action, but just start little by little. Or actually, yeah, what I'd like to go back to is the start within. Start with yourself. If we all were to change our individual selves, the world would be a better place anyway. So just take that first step.
Nan?
I suppose for me, it would come down to, and Zella's put it a lot better than I could, that, listen, learn, grow, listen to what people are saying, learn from it, and change your behavior, and be willing to call out other people's behavior, and just take that step to grow as a person, and then help kind of grow as a collective.
Thank you. Corey?
Wasn't expecting that, I was like, oh my God. So yeah, obviously everyone's kind of said that you just start and really educate yourself. Everyone, like 99% of young people in the UK use social media, so just follow kind of pages that you might not usually follow that might educate you a little bit more, whether that's Instagram, TikTok. I don't have TikTok, I'm just throwing it out there. But and I think just one of the key things is when you're having the conversations, it's about positive, like Nan said, it's positively challenging. Like, it's just really bear in mind, like, you don't want to, these topics can be quite emotional, especially if you're trying to get involved for the first time. So don't be worried about like the phrasing of questions, especially if you're ignorant, is always going to be quite awkward. So just make sure you're in a safe space. Say what you need to say. Make sure everyone understands where you're coming from. That you're not trying to offend. You're just trying to learn. Don't feel no type of way. That could make you feel uncomfortable. So, yeah.
Thank you. Antonio?
Well, fun answer. I'd say start by listening to these two songs in this order that I put it. Michael Jackson, Black or White, and then Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror. And that will sum up everything we've just touched on. For a more serious answer, I would just start. A lot of people don't start. I think I would just start. That's the main thing. Once you start, the rest comes in handy, and you'll realize why the hair lost by getting complacent, to be fair.
Okay, they're going straight on all of our playlists, I think, very soon. And I'm sure a lot of you got that in your head as well now. Tatiana?
So I like Antonio and Suna said, just start, but after you've started, keep humanity at the fore. Remember that the person in front of you is a human. What are your standards for the treatment of humans? And just follow that.
Amazing, thank you. And last but not least, cliche line, Rachel.
That's tough. That's tough. A group of people to follow. It has to be said. But I was going to say, I was building on Tatiana's actually, which was fundamentally it's about people. My view of the country I lived in changed when Stephen Lawrence was murdered in 1993, and for someone who hadn't experienced racism before, I think that was the first experience of racism that, really made me think about what it must be like. I'm never going to know, but it just made me think that there was a lot of work to do, and I think there's still work to do. But I think, to echo all of you, if you don't start, we're never going to get there. So what did I write? I wrote, do the reading, go on the training, create the frameworks, make sure the law is right, and then just live it, because we want to live in a society where everyone is equal and everyone is valued and everyone has the same opportunities. And it's up to all of us to make that happen. So thank you very much from everyone at Live Space, from everyone who's going to listen to this, for your incredible insights, generosity of spirit, and honesty and bravery. It has been inspiring and brilliant to hear from all of you. Thank you very much.
I'm going to end with reiterating the same, and a special thank you to Sula as well for helping put this together. You all have been amazing. So thank you so much for all your honesty, being so open, like what's the word, vulnerable, being so honest. So I hope we can make some conversations begin from this. So thank you so much to all you all.
Thank you, everyone. That was absolutely incredible. Thank you.
Thank you all.